Hello everyone, so this is going to be a video about my self-publishing journey, so to speak. Um, I wanted to kind of talk about what a first-time self-publisher is in for and kind of just add my experience to the pile because everyone's path is going to be different depending on your skill set, your writing speed, your budget, things like that. So, for me personally, I have a 75,000 page novel. Took me a couple hundred hours to write it over about 7 months while I had a full time job. And the thing about writing is when I had finished my first draft, I thought that that was most of the work, but it's not. That's kind of the fun part, is actually writing the first draft. But then you have to refine it, and it can get difficult. So, how much time did I spend on actually planning the book? Well, I personally am more of a discovery writer. So, I had all my world building done, but not much of a plot planned. So, I had a basic plot, my characters kind of moderately fleshed out, but since I'm writing science fiction, my characters don't have to be the driving part of the story. The world and setting and plot are kind of the main drivers of the story and action. So I didn't personally have to have pages and pages and pages of character planning. But, if you're doing something like a romance novel, you might want that. You might want to have really detailed characters. But focusing on science fiction, most of my work was in imagining the setting. So, you write your first draft, and your first draft of your first novel, unless you are incredibly gifted, just isn't going to be good enough to publish. Um, Mine wasn't, and I ended up rewriting most of the book into a second draft and drastically changing the plot, cutting out plot lines, simplifying the book, streamlining it, enumerating some of the more exciting parts, and overall just trying to improve it. And then I still didn't feel like it was good enough to publish, so I just stashed it and started another book. But last night I finished rereading my second draft, and I have decided that instead of writing another book, I'm going to do a third draft and then just pull the trigger and publish, even if I don't feel like it's good enough. The reason why I have such a kind of like a high standard is because my favorite authors had amazing debuts. So, you know, like for example, Only Forward by Michael Marshall Smith is one of my favorite books. And man, you want to try to match a debut like that. Like, there's no way I can, but I at least want it to be good. So, I didn't want to publish just for the sake of publishing. Now, how do you get your book good enough to publish without a publisher? Well, you're going to have to do your own quality control. How does that work? Well, if you really want solid quality control, you're going to need some money, unfortunately. Unless you are incredibly talented and you know how to edit your own work, which is kind of hard because when you wrote it, it's hard to pull back and have a objective view of it. So, for a 75,000 page book, I paid $2,500 for the editing. I think that I probably could have gotten it cheaper. I did it off Reedsy, and looking back, I'm not sure I really got my money's worth because it was mostly fixing typos and things and fixing grammar and changing sentences around. But I kind of needed a little bit more in terms of structure, narrative, plot, characters. So, if you want to go cheaper, I personally think that one good option is to get a very, very good beta reader off of Fiverr. One that has experience publishing, has worked at a publisher, has gotten published, and paying them a couple $100 to read your book. It's a couple $100. And, 1/10 the cost of an editor. And they will read your book and give you high level feedback. I would recommend doing this after your first draft and just tell them, ignore the typos, tell me how I should write my second draft and what I should change. Because I edited my first draft, and going through and making sure every sentence was perfect and all that, it was a complete waste of time because I ended up scrapping almost all of it. And now, if I want to publish my third draft, I'm going to have to get it edited all over again. So I would recommend don't edit your first draft. Don't pay an editor. Pay a beta reader for your first draft. And then just for fixing typos and grammar and things, you can get what's called a copy editor. They're cheaper. And they will kind of just check for inconsistencies, typos, tone, things like that. They're a little bit more expensive than a beta reader, but still much cheaper than a full-on pure, complete, full package editor. And then once you truly have your final draft ready, then you edit it. Get it edited. But if you can't afford to get it edited, then just do the best you can by doing a copy editor and then really making sure that you don't have typos. And that's going to take a while because you have to read your book probably more than once, at least parts of it. So it's either money or hours, and money, hours, and skill. If you're going to go the no editor route, then you need to have both hours and skill. And you've already spent so many hours writing, so it can get quite exhausting, especially if this is like a part-time thing, which for 99.9% of self-published authors out there, you're not going to be paying your bills, especially not with your first book. So, you're lucky if it pays for itself. You're lucky. So, I'm not expecting it to pay for itself. I just want to put it out there. Um, Sorry, this is my third attempt at the video, and I kind of forget what I said in this video versus my previous attempts, but basically, I wish that I had hired a good beta reader earlier instead of waiting until after I edited. That's the wrong order. Because a beta reader can just ignore typos. It's not a huge deal. Like if you have a semicolon instead of a hyphen, I mean, whatever, right? So a beta reader knows that you're going to go through and fix all that. Some people might be inspired by recent authors' trends to just not edit their books. Neil Asher just published Jenny Trapdoor that I reviewed. Independently published, disgusting amount of typos. Like as many typos as were in my first draft. And then apparently my friend told me Stephen King has recently had more and more typos in his books and isn't really using an editor. Don't follow that example because those authors are already famous with a fan base. So if they have a couple typos, people will kind of forgive them for that because they've read Stephen Asher, they've read Stephen Asher, they've read Stephen King, they've read Neil Asher, and so they know what to expect from the book despite the typos. But if you're a new author and the person hits typos on the first couple pages or the first dozen pages, I think they might, just put it down. So I think that by having your book formatted perfect, you can kind of show that you've put time and effort into writing it, and that will allow you to show the reader that you respect their time also and are grateful for their time for reading your book. And that's really what you're competing for, is a reader's time, because there's a million books out there and a lot to read. So yeah, it's going to cost you, if you want to go with a full-on editor, it's probably going to cost you about $3,000. And then also you are going to need some ebook software. I used Vellum, Vellum. It only works on Mac though, that's its problem. So if you don't have a Mac, you can't use Vellum. If you do have a Mac, I can recommend Vellum. It's awesome. And it makes turning your draft into an ebook quite simple. As simple as it can be. And then it has a lot of really cool formatting options. Vellum's $300. It's not the end of the world. It's not a negligible cost, but it's also not extreme. There's no subscription or anything. You pay it once, you pay the fee once, and then you have it forever. So that part's cool. But publishing the book is not your last step. Now you're going to have to market it. And that's going to cost, well, people think, oh, I can do my own marketing. Okay. That's going to take away from your writing time in a huge way. You need a Bookstagram account with followers. You need, ideally, even maybe like a YouTube book review channel, just something. You need some kind of social media following on some platform to truly get good marketing out there if you don't want to spend money. So most people are going to have to spend money. And if you don't spend money, you're going to have to spend a lot of time acquiring an audience. So if you spend money, that's another couple grand to get a good, solid marketing campaign to make your book able to pay for itself. Maybe not the marketing aspect, but you can get it to pay for its production cost. And also, you know, you get readers, you get an audience, and that's really cool. And the thing about a beta reader is that if your book sucks, you'll know ahead of time. So you don't have to, waste all this time and money only to find out that you're going to have a 3 stars on Goodreads. So you're also going to have to do, as a self-publisher, all the legwork of getting an ISBN, which is pretty easy. And then, putting it on Goodreads, making your author profile, all that can be done in a day though. So not the end of the world. But, I like to spend as much time as I can writing because I also have a full-time job. So basically, the way I think of it is I would rather work extra hours and then use that money to pay somebody else to do what they're good at, because I'm not good at marketing and it's hard to edit your own work. So it's kind of like, okay, do a little bit of overtime that you would have spent marketing and then pay a marketer. And then, let's see. Once you have, if you don't want to pay for a beta reader, you can go on Reddit or probably some other sites, but I just looked at Reddit/r/beta readers, and you can swap with other authors. So they wrote a book, you wrote a book, you read theirs, they read yours. The problem with that is you're going to have to spend time reading the other person's book, and 2, the other person isn't a professionally trained beta reader. So I would want somebody with some publishing experience, because another self-publishing author, who knows how good they are at critiquing, right? So I paid a really cheap beta reader, like $70 to read my book, and they gave it a 7 out of 10. That was the first draft. The second draft I haven't had read yet, and I'm going to pay a fancier beta reader to read my second draft and then use that feedback to finalize it into my third draft and then go for it. My debut novel. Expectations and standards. It really depends on what kind of person you are. Some people might think their book is better than it is. I thought my book was worse than it was because, I've historically struggled with pessimism and depression, so self-esteem was an issue for me. But I waited a year, read it again, and it's not as bad as I thought. So, and I can still make it better and refine it. And I think that I have something salvageable there, which is cool. So, it's going to be a journey. It's not going to be just, I write my first draft, check it over, and then hit publish. Some self publishing authors do that and they don't get much going for them because their books are trash. Oh, okay. Oh, getting tired here. What else did I want to warn people about? Okay, so to summarize, don't hire an editor right away because it's the most expensive step. Do beta reader. If you can afford one, then swap with someone. Do a copy editor for typos. If you can't afford one, you're going to have to meticulously go through your own book and also learn a thing or two about proper writing principles. Going to have to read a little bit of stuff, watch a little bit of stuff to learn how things are supposed to be written, unless you already have experience with editing and stuff. And then it's going to be very hard to do your own developmental editing because you've theoretically already written what you think is the best possible version of your story. So you kind of need an outside perspective. It really depends on where you're at in life, how much money you have. You know, I'm 31, so $300 for vellum is no big deal. Whereas when I was 21, that would have been a bigger deal, you know? So it really is just all about where you're at. If you're richer than me, like, you know, you don't care how much it costs, you can just kind of only write and then pay other people to do everything else. And that's kind of cool. But it's going to be really hard for your book to pay for itself in that scenario. I just ballpark, I would guess that's going to cost you like 5, 6, 7 grand to do that. The other thing that I can recommend is starting with a novella. I started with a full-size novel. Mine's 75,000 words. I heard about a guy who his very first book was 350,000 words. And don't write that many words before you even know if you're any good at it. So if you can write like a 30 to 40,000 word story and keep it within that length, it's going to be cheaper to edit. It's going to be less time consuming to write new drafts. Everything's going to be cheaper. And you can kind of get your name out there and have more titles under your belt. I just needed 75,000 words to tell my story. I don't like long books, and I tried to make mine as short as possible without making the reader feel like I was just skipping through a whole lot of story. So that's the other thing. Start with a novella if you don't have the funds. Like, it's better to do the whole process on a novella than go all skimpy on some 100,000 page book and not be able to afford editing and all that, because the bigger the book, the riskier, the harder it is to write, and the riskier, the more typos there's going to be and stuff, and the more time it takes. And also, readers don't have that much time. So, like, look at the Murderbot Diaries, okay? The Murderbot Diaries are like 120 pages, 140 pages each. And then she just published like 7 of those in little bite sized pieces, novellas. that's a really good way to do it if your story allows for that. Um, so yeah, I think that overall beta reading is more useful than editing in the early stages. And when you hire an editor, you want to make sure that you're not going to make more super major changes or rewrites because it's going to cost you some cash. And obviously, ebook, Kindle. That's going to be your main route, is to ask Jeff Bezos for help. Um, it's the most accessible. Throw your book up on Kindle Unlimited and pray it doesn't die like all the other Kindle Unlimited independent published books. With proper marketing and things, you can at least get some readers, and if your book's amazing, it'll snowball. I talked to Zamil Akhtar on Reddit. I just messaged him. He's an author who published Gunmetal Gods, Conqueror's Blood, and I think the third one's called Elder Epic. But Gunmetal Gods was his fantasy book that he published, his debut, and man, it exploded. Threw it on Kindle Unlimited, totally unknown independent author, and it just blew up. Why? Because it's a masterpiece, and Zamil Akhtar is an incredibly talented author. So, if you've got what it takes, you can have some success. But, you got to be lucky and skilled. So, that's probably not going to happen to your debut. But there's a chance it will, and that's kind of exciting, right? And he kind of talked about, I was asking him more about his world building process more than the publishing process, but his publishing process wasn't anything incredibly different from what other self publishing authors do. He just had an incredible book. So yeah, good luck to all you out there. There's more books than there are readers. There's more books written than there are readers to read them. And that just keeps getting worse and worse because there's more and more books written and people are capable of reading older things. So, you know, you can read all the books from 2023, 2022, 2021, going all the way back. And so the pile of books to read gets bigger and bigger every year. And nobody can keep up with the rate of publishing. So you're competing for readers' time. When I make the video game that I'm making, it's the same thing. There's more video games being made than there are gamers to play them. So that's just the life of a creative person. There's a lot of people making stuff out there, unfortunately, and you can't go around thinking that you're super special. You have to put in the time, work, effort, and probably money too. All right. I think I'll just leave it at that. Oh my God, 30 minutes? I'm sorry, everybody. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully I helped a little. I feel like the video might have gotten a little too long, but that's the end of that. All right, thanks.